What's up, guys? Welcome to Roensch Capital Charts. Today we're taking a look at Supermicro computer stock, ticker symbol SMCI, on a variety of time frames in anticipation of the next trading day, Tuesday, April 2nd. Okay, guys, Supermicro stock here today, up $27.12 per share. That's plus 2.69% in regular trading hours. Let's take a look at this name and try to pull out as much possible bias as we can using things like the volume profile, the psychological levels, right, the technical levels. The areas that I expect we're going to see a lot more volume out of traders making decisions, the bias out of the options traders here today, and finally, the expected move. So let's get started here with our daily ritual, pulling out the hidden bias out of the volume profile here on the 5-minute chart. The primary move that I want to take a look at here today, or I suppose a couple of moves, on SMCI is going to be that pump that we got off the open here today, and then that fade that kind of swiftly followed. Those are really the only two moves that I'm primarily interested in here today. Let's take a look if the bias correlated on both of those moves with the price action, which, by the way, not always is the case. Now, if we take a look here, we typically expect kind of a U shape out of the volume profile, with the closing bell volume typically being 1/3 to 2/3 the size of the open. But what we don't typically see is this big out of context period of volume holding well over the open this far into the day. We do have one, battle bar with a big wick, which lets me know that was a battle bar, breaking this green streak up. But if we remove that, which, it's only one bar breaking it up, and we went higher still after that bar, this is a large amount of consecutive green bars that are out of context in terms of volume versus what is typically expected for this time of day. Well after the open, there is a very obvious bullish bias that correlates with that bullish move on the push that we saw after the opening bell. Now, if we move on, we saw a big fade in volume as the stock began to fade. Okay, we did get a couple of very small bearish bias pops, right? But nowhere near the kind of bias that we saw on that bullish move off of the open, which I think is really interesting here today. Now, let's move on to the 30-minute chart and take a look at the self-fulfilling prophecy psychological levels that I'm taking a look at very closely here tomorrow. So, today, we broke that level that we were struggling to reclaim late last week, right? We headed into the weekend struggling to reclaim that 50 period here on the 30-minute. We busted through on high volume today, got close to a retest, never actually made a true retest, that's okay, and spent basically the entirety of today above that level. We now have an ascending 50 period, which is a change from last week. It was previously descending. Today's volume forced that back upside, meeting with the 200 period, which in my experience tends to beef up the potential strength of that level. This is a good thing to see for bulls today. Bulls, any retest of this region here tomorrow, going to want to see a bounce on high volume. Anything except for average to below average volume is a good thing to see on a hold of that level, since we weren't really able to get a nice retest today. Bears, your primary goal is to get a break downside beneath both of these levels. Bulls, this is what you would not want to see. That would take about a 2% downside move to do so. Downside break on high volume, retest of then what would be the 200 period since it's the lower level, on lower volume, and then confirmation of new resistance with a high volume rejection back downside, opening you up for a downside test of 1,000. That's what bears would want to see. Now, let's move on here to the 4-hour chart and take a look. You can see that 50 period very much so in play. That was a question heading into the weekend. Was SMCI going to be able to hold that 50 period here on the 4-hour chart? And today we got a nice high volume pull away from that level, putting a little bit more distance currently in the after hours. We're about 4.3, 4.4% away from a back test of that 50 period. It's starting to flatten out a little bit here today. Also a good thing to see. So bulls, of course, on a retest, you'd want to see a high volume bounce, but a retest really isn't ideal since that's below $1,000 a share. Really what I'm looking for here as a bull would be to see that 50 period starting to flatten out and curl upside and getting above $1,000 a share as soon as possible. Whereas bears, you guys want to see that 50 period stay below 1,000, because you have enough problems cracking downside, at least as of late, through $1,000 as it is. You don't want that 50 period beefing up the strength of that level if you're a bear. Now, the big story here, the daily chart. This is the most important thing that we can possibly look at. This has the most eyeballs and paints the clearest picture here today heading into tomorrow. Really clear story here. Two things. We're currently in a channel from 1,000 to 1,100. It's really obvious. Bulls, do not give up $1,000 a share. By any means necessary, do not give it up. Okay? Use 1,000 as a trampoline to push up and through 1,100, which we've been struggling as of late to get up through, as soon as possible. Break out through the upside of that channel. Bears. 1,100 is kind of like that level you don't want to give up. That's your 1,000 equivalent if you're a bear is 1,100. Your big goal, though, if you're a bear, you have to break downside through $1,000 a share ASAP, because that's a level that's causing you problems. It's a huge psychological level that has been holding. And you bears want to reclaim that $1,000 psychological level as resistance as soon as you possibly can. Now, expected move. Let's take a look at that. The next expiration we have here on SMCI is Friday at close. The expected move. Now, this is expected volatility, which is a huge piece of this puzzle. Okay? The analysis, and then something we'll do at the very end is what gives us directional potential bias, right, out of the market. This is the volatility bias, which is a huge piece of the positioning puzzle. Plus or minus $70.78 per share by close on Friday. Now, we have no earnings or outsized expectation for any one particular day. So if we divide that by 4, that gives us a market expectation of about plus or minus $17.70 per day. But that's assuming a green or red streak, right? So what I like to do to account for a mix of red and green days is to add about 50% to that, which gives us about, $26.54 approximately, plus or minus per day is market volatility expectation. So if you're someone who thinks that we're going to see outsized moves and you have a strong directional bias, you're likely someone who might end up buying contracts. And if you're someone who is more neutral in terms of your bias and you think that we're not going to see that much movement as the market's expecting, perhaps you start trading, non-directional or neutral spreads, looking to capitalize on potential crush of IV or realized volatility, more so being lower than what is the current expected volatility. Okay. Now, last thing we can take a look at here. What was the options traders' bias directionally here today? 119,000 total contracts traded, 69,600 calls, 49,700 about puts. Okay, so we are seeing it's not extraordinary, but it's a call side bias on the overall ratio. But the short-term speculators, those short-term bets being placed, those far out of the money aggressive bets, 20,500 calls, 24,800 puts. So that flips, at least today. The volume's not incredibly high, so take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. But, we're dealing with a $1,000 stock, right? So, we're seeing a slight bearish bias actually out of the short-term bets being placed, but the overall ratio is still leaning, a good amount to the call side. Listen, if you get value out of these videos, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I greatly appreciate it. It helps out tremendously. Someone you care about, perhaps a friend, family member, owns Supermicro computer stock, or maybe is interested in getting involved. If you think they'll benefit from the information presented in this video, go ahead and send it to them. I appreciate it. And I hope they get plenty of value as well. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.